When I was growing up, my grandparents always seemed a little off to me. They weren't like a lot of grandparents like the ones my friends had. Their grandparents would go to their sports games and family functions and just be great pillars for guidance and love. My parents would try to get me and my siblings to bond more with my grandparents. It just always felt so tense and weird. They lived in a big house in the countryside, and whenever we visited, I couldn't help but feel a sense of unease. My grandfather was a big man, like huge. He was about 6'8" with a thick beard and a gruff voice. He would always stare at me with a stern expression as if he didn't approve of me, and those eyes would just scream judgmentally at me. My grandmother, on the other hand, was a small, frail woman, probably close to half the size of my grandfather, with a soft voice and a kind smile. However, somehow I felt even more uneasy around her. There was something about my grandmother that always made me uncomfortable. At first, I thought my discomfort around them was due to their stern demeanor, but as I got older, I started to notice some strange things about them. Whenever I asked my grandparents about their past, they would just kind of clam up and usually just change the subject. Sometimes they would say they didn't like to talk about it and then just end the conversation abruptly. With my uncertainty, I became even more curious. I would notice that they never had any photos around the house except for photos from the last 20 years or so. Whenever I asked my dad, he would just say that he really didn't know and he didn't care. He didn't have a good relationship with them, and that's probably why he wanted us to have a better relationship with them, like he didn't. And my dad actually spent a lot of time at a boarding school, I guess, so he didn't see a whole lot of my grandparents growing up. And by the time he was 18, he was already on his own. One day, my curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to kind of look around the house very intently. I made my way to the attic, and while exploring, I stumbled upon an old trunk. Inside, I found a stack of old photographs that left me feeling kind of confused and uneasy. You see, the first big stack was older photos of my grandparents. They were young, and my grandmother was beautiful. I was confused as to why they didn't have any of these photos hanging up. There were several photos from their wedding and many more from what I assume was a honeymoon or vacation. What left me uneasy wasn't the pictures of my grandparents, but the other stack of photos that were in the trunk. The pictures showed unknown people, all staring straight at the camera with seemingly no visible expression. They were older black and white photos from the waist up of random people. These people were not family members, and I didn't recognize any of them. Even with their sort of static expression, I somehow could sense the fear of these people in the photos. There were dozens of these photos, and not one picture was the same. When I flipped the photos over, they all had been marked with a pen. They had two letters which I assumed were probably initials of the subject in the photo and an arrow that pointed up, down, left, or right. I spent about an hour looking at every photo, trying to figure out some clue as to what these photos could be. I knew if I spent any more time in the attic, my grandparents would find out, and I didn't want to see what the reaction would be. So I threw the photos back in the trunk and just joined my siblings downstairs. I knew that I needed to be careful around them, but I didn't know why, and I didn't know whom to talk to about this. I felt trapped in a sort of strange web of secrets, and I couldn't shake the feeling that people in those photos were most likely in danger of some kind, but it could just be my imagination. Either way, years passed, and my grandparents began to just grow old and frail, as many do, and they become more reclusive, and they stopped leaving the house altogether and even stopped allowing us kids to come over and visit. And one day, I received a phone call from my aunt and uncle. They told me that my grandparents had been found dead in their house, and the cops ruled that their deaths were natural causes, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to their passing. As I cleaned out their house with my family, I found myself wanting to visit the attic and look at the old trunk. The photographs were still there, but this time there was something new in the trunk. A handwritten letter from my grandmother that she had dated, and if I had to guess, it appeared to be right around the last time that I was there and went through the trunk. And the letter said, "I know it was someone in this family that went through our trunk. I am appalled and horrified that someone would go through our precious memories. Besides, they're just photographs." She signed her name, with love. I realized then that I had never truly known my grandparents, nor did my father or aunt. They had been living some sort of strange, secretive life, one filled with mystery and I guess intrigue just to make it sound more special. But it's hard to know if they were just strange and artistic people or if something much darker was at play in these photographs. I still have that note that I found, and I keep that in the trunk of keepsakes at my house. I showed my family the photos, and nobody seemed to really care at all and just assumed that they were just a bunch of random pictures. I may be thinking too much about this, and maybe you don't find this story very scary, but if you knew my grandparents, the way they acted, the energy they gave off, the way they lived, you'd be suspicious, too. If you enjoyed this scary story, listen to thousands more, either over on the Let's Read YouTube channel or podcast.